Okay. Thank you. Okey doke. Any changes to the agenda? I'm just going to stack it.
Just a couple on-table items you'll notice in your package. One is 10.2A relating to Metro Vancouver business, and 10.3A relating to Islands Trust.
Okay, great. Yes, Sue Ellen?
I just had changes to the consent agenda, is that?
Oh, we're not yet.
Okay.
Okay. So, approve agenda.
Oh, can I ask for a removal of an item?
Yeah, sure.
10.1. We'll speak to, I can speak to that when we have our budget.
When you have your what?
Okay,
Budget.
so we'll remove 10.1 from the agenda.
Okay.
Done. Okay, motion to approve agenda, seconded. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. Okay. Back to the beginning. Public comments. What do we got, Tyler?
We have Nick Mitchell, please.
Good morning.
Morning, how are you? Good. I believe I'm on the agenda for consent to move forward with the covered space for the Westside Children's Park. Over the course of the year, myself and Bonnie and the volunteers that are working on the Westside Children's Park have achieved quite a few milestones. So the landscaping is completed, the area is flat, the rock wall is built. The grass was put in, 4 pieces of large equipment have been in place. So that includes a low balance beam, a log tunnel, the whale drum, and a large climbing structure. There's a few items that need to be finished on each one of them to get ready for the opening this late spring. But we've sort of progressed with all that sort of stuff. And that sort of finishes phase 1, which is approved by council. So the other thing that we wanted to add to get approval for was a covered area, and this is in conjunction with West Vancouver School. They are using it as a learning tool for their carpentry program. I'm not sure what you call it, but it's I forget the exact dimensions, but it's 12 by 21 or 16 by 21.
16 by 22.
16 by 22, okay. With the overhangs, and so it's a timber frame construction, which is sort of congruent with what is generally put together for the parks, similar to Crichton Park, and a few of the other structures in the park system. And it has engineering completed, design completed and approved. And so we're submitting it to you guys for approval, so that it can be built hopefully this spring and should be good to go.
Is West Vancouver paying to build it?
The school is actually milling the timbers, and the timbers were local. They were cut down actually about 500 meters from the park. Greg Cormier, who's the new building inspector. Yeah. No, he's the shop teacher at West Vancouver School and a friend of mine, and he had volunteered his time and his students' time to use this as a building for a project for timber framing. So it's going to be big, massive timbers that are going to be erected. So the timbers are supplied by them, the hardware is supplied by us, and the concrete is supplied by us. So we're sort of juggling those.
And you have the funding in place for it?
Yeah, 100%. Actually, we have a little left over too.
Excellent.
Very cool.
Did you want to speak to that too? Oh, sorry, are you finished?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
I have a question about
Yeah.
the concrete, and I'm wondering, since you're here, in my long experience with parks and day use areas and picnic structures and different covered structures, concrete is really cold and it's really hard, and for little children it smells funny, especially over time. And I'm wondering if there would be an opportunity to switch to something more flexible, like wood chips or something that you would use at a playground thing, so that children could play under the structure
Yeah.
as well as whatever, and it was also whatever furnishings you can put in there, would also be warmer for parents' feet
Yeah.
or kids sitting on the ground.
Yeah, like, I mean, I'm totally flexible to that. We could use gravel, I suppose. I was just thinking more in the terms of maintenance. You know, like, I know with the maintenance, it's an issue with the municipality. We're not a large municipality with a high population density, but I mean, I'm kind of really open to anything. I was just thinking more about containing it, the chips or gravel. Could do like a cement
Yeah, I
cream or
think-
something.
Good, well, we can
Yeah,
discuss
we don't
this
wanna
as
get
part
too
of
far
the
into the
agenda. I
details.
just
Yeah,
had a
yeah,
question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something else?
Well, I was just going to say, we've been approached by a group at Bix, and the chips and things are not particularly usable or accessible friendly
Accessible,
for kids that have mobility issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
And wheelchairs for a parent to wheel under the
I just
shade.
had the one question.
Yeah, I don't think we want to get too far into this one. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any other questions, and you're more than welcome to come to the site too and check it out.
Yes, I've been out there.
Phone
Looking
number
good.
is posted too.
Looking great.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for all the work
Yeah.
you're doing on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Come together.
That's it. That's all the comments.
That's it. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. Anything anyone want to pull?
3.4 and 3.5,
3.4, okay.
which is the wildfire prevention, and 3.5, which is the bike structure.
3.4, 3.5, right at the end. Okay. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, Allison?
3.2 and 3.3. I'm just checking.
3 minutes? Okay. 3.2 and 3.3. Anything else? Okay, motion to adopt consent agenda. Seconded, all in favor? Okay, and that is passed. Okay. Next up, delegations. Mr. Leonard Foster. Good morning, sir. Oh, thanks for joining us.
Did Nick stay?
Thank you very much for your time today. I'm Leonard Foster. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about a project that we've been doing on the island for the last, or really the Lower Mainland, but it has involved a lot of activities on the island for the last few years. My lab, among other things, studies honeybees, and we've been trying to address the major problem that is facing bees in North America, and specifically in British Columbia, which are infectious diseases and pests. Parasitic mite is by far the biggest pest. And what we have been trying to do is a selective breeding program to select for bees that are going to be naturally resistant to disease. And if I can draw your attention over here, what we're focusing on is something called hygienic behavior. And hygienic behavior, as you might imagine, is bees that are basically better at keeping their colony clean. And this isn't so much about dirt, but more about pests and pathogens. And they get those pathogens out of the colonies more quickly than non-hygienic bees. These are not, I should stress at the beginning, these are not genetic modification experiments in any way. These are using some more advanced tools that we have at UBC to guide a selective breeding program for things that naturally exist in the honeybee population, but are just not widespread enough to really have the beneficial effects for the bee industry that we would like. So this is just a picture of people doing a hygienic behavior test, but the results of it look something like this, where on the left, we had killed a bunch of developing bees and basically made the other bees in the colony think that they are dead, well, they were dead, but that they were probably dying from a pathogen infection or a pest infection. And the hygienic bees are extremely efficient at cleaning out all of these cells. You can see live brood developing over here. all of the dead ones have been cleaned out. In a non-hygienic colony, this thing in the center here is the brood that is dead but has not been cleaned out. And what we're trying to do is select for bees that are better at this kind of behavior, because that then allows them to be resistant to other behavior, or to other pests and pathogens, real pests and pathogens, as opposed to human pests and pathogens. So what we've been doing over the last 3 years is to work with bee breeders around the Lower Mainland, including here on the island, and we do some field testing. We do some, we collect some samples, bring them back to UBC, and then this is where Bowen has a particular interest for us. We move in a breeding program, you want to mate males and females, obviously, that you've selected, and generate offspring. So we move the drones, those are male bees, and the queens that have not yet mated to Bowen Island here, and we do what's called a closed mating program. And then we've been redistributing those queens to bee breeders across the Lower Mainland, again, including here on the island, and going through this process over a few years. And the big advantage it's on the next slide, the big advantage to Bowen for us, two advantages really, is that there are a small number of beekeepers here, and the beekeeping community seems to be quite cooperative with one another, I mean. And the small number is important because bees, when they mate, they fly off up to a few kilometers away from their colony, and they will mate with a queen will mate with whatever drones are in the area. So it's not as easy as putting a male cow and a female cow in a paddock together and getting them to mate. It's really a much more complicated system. So if you have a small number of other sources of bees around, especially ones that will cooperate with you to achieve your mating goals, it makes it much easier. And because it's isolated, we also don't have to worry about influx of different genetics from the mainland. And it's also local to us near UBC, so we can really do this project that really involves a lot of the bee breeding operations in the Lower Mainland, but do it in an effective way. If one tried to do this in Abbotsford, for example, it just wouldn't work because you can't control who your queens are going to mate with. They might mate with your drones, but they might not. And so trying to select for anything, whether it's this hygienic behavior or not, is just completely ineffective. And my intent in coming before you today was mostly as an update to tell you that we are active in this, to be able to answer any questions, and not just for the council, but also to make the broader community aware. I think everybody who keeps bees on the island is aware that we've been doing this, and there's been some discussion in the local either websites or newspapers as well. But this was the opportunity to formally let you know about it and try to answer any questions that people might have. Thank you.
Very cool. Yeah. Quick question. Just out of curiosity.
Sure.
Are you able to sort of get a super number of queens? Do you know what I mean? Or if you once you're doing this, if you succeeded and you want to spread this across the world, how do you get enough queens?
Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I do know what you mean, because we think a lot about that. And actually, the Canadian bee industry is not very good at that yet. And part of it's not that. When Canadians beekeepers buy queens, most of ours come from Hawaii. Some from other places as well. There's a lot of queens that are produced within Canada. The challenge, it's not that Hawaii knows something that we don't, but they have a climate that allows them to do it year-round. And importantly, they have a climate that allows them to do it when other people need queens. Canadian beekeepers need queens usually in a month or two, in like March, April. And because of our general Canadian climate, we just can't raise queens that early in the spring. So then you would be kind of forced to try and do it the previous year, but we aren't very good at keeping large numbers of queens through a winter like that. So right now, the Canadian industry is not well scaled up to do that, but it's also not been apparent that there's a there's a good reason for them to do that. And one of the hopes is if we can select for bees that are really quite strong and well adapted to the local climate, that will then allow basically the economics of it to drive greater queen production. That beekeepers or bee breeders would be able to demand higher prices for queens that are well adapted and disease resistant, and that would then lead to production increasing. So right now, our goal has been to do this with the people who are in the queen production business and selling queens to other beekeepers. And if we can improve the genetics that they're drawing on, then that then sort of extends the genetics, the genetic effects farther, faster.
Okay, I'll go to Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Leonard. Very interesting and well done, because it's a great project to have going forward. I mean, that's our food production
Yeah,
depends on it.
yeah,
So I've got a buddy who wants to put some hives and bees on his property because
Yeah.
he's got fruit trees and that sort of thing. But he should be talking to you, so because you don't want somebody to import a different kind of bee.
so
Yeah.
he should be actually talking to some of our colleagues here.
Yeah.
There's,
Yeah.
yeah, so there's
Well,
a
that's
few things for that. So for our specific breeding project, what we're doing is moving the drones in and moving the queens in that we want to mate. And then what we're asking the beekeepers on the island to let us do for a short period of time is put a gate in front of their colonies, basically, so that the drones in their colonies can't get out and then
Okay.
mate with our queens.
All right.
So, but their workers can still get out and they can collect honey, and it doesn't generally interfere with the other operations of the colony. And then that can be removed, and then everything goes back to normal. So for that specific purpose, moving other bees in like that doesn't really impact on our specific project.
Okay.
But Bowen also has an advantage that many other geographically isolated areas in the country are trying to take advantage of as well. That there's a lot of evidence that having locally adapted bees are far better than constantly importing bees that may not be adapted to the climate or to the disease profile that is present there. So I think it would be very important for anybody coming in to talk to the rest of the beekeeping community, particularly Ian, who's been trying to champion this idea of trying to, as much as possible, be self-sufficient for your bee population. And it's never good to have a completely inbred population, obviously, and so
Okay,
there needs to be a little bit of mixing. But if it's done in a careful way, as opposed to buying some queens from Hawaii or New Zealand or something like that,
Yeah.
it would benefit the broader agricultural community.
That's great.
Go to Sue Ellen first and then Allison.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming to tell us about it. I know people are concerned about honeybees and colony collapse disorder and what we see in the price of almonds or, you know, our food supply. And I see people, researchers down in the States trying to raise native bee, the blue orchard bees and things like that to replace, in case they need to replace honeybees. So thank you for helping Bowen Island help to save the bees and also to have these robust pollinators that are good at their house cleaning duties. It's great that Bowen can play a role in agriculture and science. Thank you.
Allison.
A curiosity question, because you said it's the Faculty of Medicine that's doing this.
Yeah, as I said that, I figured that was probably a bit of a flag. But yeah, sorry, go on with your question.
Well, so I guess that then raised the question to me.
Yeah.
I've had people who are pregnant say to me they can't eat regular honey, they have to eat pasteurized honey.
Yeah.
And then your comment about disease with the bees, is there a concern that this is also something that would be a disease spreader as far as keeping disease from spreading with humans?
So as far as I'm aware, all of the bees or the diseases that affect bees are not zoonotic in any way. Someone actually took a bacteria that infects bees and injected it somehow directly into their bloodstream and got some kind of weird infection that way. But apart from that, there's no transfer of bee disease to a human. The pasteurized honey issue is a botulinum contamination of honey. But actually, as far as I know, in the last roughly 5 years, there's only been one case of that in North America, so it's really not even a thing. It's still recommended, basically, but it's one of those things where there's many other greater dangers that we expose our kids to that that's not something that really we should be worrying about.
Maureen?
I live in an area where there's a relatively new orchard. It's Nancy Leonard's property on Harding Road.
Yeah.
Is that sort of a central site? Because every once in a while there are a gazillion hives. It's like hive reunion, and I
Right.
wonder, what are they doing?
Yeah, so we have used Nancy and Ian are both right here. Nancy's property has been a central part of the project, partly, mostly because, she's a beekeeper and interested in it, but also it's quite an open area. There's good forage around there, so on the island, it's an ideal beekeeping site. And we've done a lot of the mating. We've moved a lot of the colonies that we're trying to get to mate to that spot. Where they're mating, we don't really know because, like I said, they're flying around and find one another, and it's usually not right next to the colonies, but that has been a central site for keeping the mating colonies. That's right.
It's done wonders for our rhododendrons.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
One thing I want to say, if there's anything we can do
Yeah.
within our power to assist your program, and we
Yeah, right.
appreciate the importance of it and the opportunity that it presents.
Right.
So we would be very amenable if something comes up and you say, we need a council to say this. We
Yeah.
can say that.
Okay. I really appreciate that and your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ian and Nancy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gary, I did chat with your.
With Alistair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got my number.
Okay, great. Super, thanks.
Okay, moving along. I believe you're next up, Ben.
So thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm here for a development variance permit for Council's consideration to lots 1 to 5 on Russell Lane. So Russell Lane is located just north of the golf course, just off of Cowan Point Drive, outside of Seymour Bay. So it's these 5 undeveloped lots that are just Russell Lane. This is Cowan Point Drive as it comes down, and obviously this is the golf course right here. It's in Zone 9A of the CD6 Comprehensive Development Zone. And so this zone has setbacks of 1.5 meters from the front or rear lot lines, and the side lot line setback from the sea is 15 meters. But what comes into play in our land use bylaw is we have this previous section 330 that says no building shall be sited within 4.6 meters of any lot line that abuts a highway, except in the BC1 and BC2 zone. So this would mean that despite the zone specific 1.5 meter setback, that they would be required to be 4.6 meters back from the lot line. So the developer noted this and applied for a variance permit in advance of their building permit so that it could all proceed smoothly. So this was presented to council. Oh, and here again is just their proposed development. So their application is to reduce that visibility setback to 1.5 meters to match their zone specific setback line. So we sent out public feedback, we posted the undercurrents, we've received no feedback on this variance application, and so our recommendation is that the variance be issued by council as drafted.
Quick question, Janet. Is this something that we're going to run into all over the island? Because you've got that broad thing, and yet when the comprehensive zoning was done, it wasn't picked up?
Yeah, so when this first came up, probably a year or two ago when I was looking at stuff, and I sort of been asking Chris, can we, like if council's given a zone specific zone that's less than that, can we read into that we considered it and we said no? And Chris said that would be nice, but we can't do that. So like the Grafton Lake development in that rezoning, where the setbacks are less than 4.6, I've included language that says despite section 3.30, the zone specific is this. And I would imagine if we do a land use bylaw housekeeping, I would be changing that and maybe I'd just put it into the SR2 in the rural residential zones, where I think where it was intended or where it seems appropriate, and I would say, setback from the highway is 4.6 meters and not have that general. Right. So it's something I'd like to clean up. Yeah, sure. And so I think we've had a couple other ones where we varied the SR2 zone and we've also varied that setback at the same time to sort of include it and capture it.
Okay, any discussion on this? Okay, can I have a motion to accept the recommendation as per the agenda package?
Yep.
And seconder? And any discussion before I call the question? All in favor? Passed unanimously. We like to deal with these quickly.
For you to stay with us for the rest of the night.
Unfortunately not, but thank you.
You'd have to pull those machines over.
The things we do to get rid of our audience.
Cleared out as a bit lonely, man.
Okay. Emma, good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm bringing forward a development variance permit application for 1225 Scarborough. This property is located in the Miller's Landing neighborhood on the east side of the island here. And just a quick background on this property. It used to have a cabin that was originally built in the 1950s, shown here in the gray shaded area. Our current land use bylaw places this original cabin within a required setback, which makes it a non-conforming building, which is allowed to legally remain in its current siting and can be renovated up to 75%, but not replaced. Also during the 2000s, 2 accessory buildings were constructed within a required setback. This was addressed in a letter issued by bylaw enforcement in 2004, but the non-compliance was never resolved and both structures still remain. In 2015, a building permit was issued for interior renovations of the original cabin. However, in 2017, it was brought to the municipality's attention that the original cabin had been replaced by construction for a new and larger house. This work was not authorized by the building permit that was issued, and it is, as you can see, contravening the land use bylaw, being within a required setback, and the new construction also encroaches on municipal land. This is a photograph of the original cabin structure. And this is a photograph of the new construction that is taking place. So you can see this is all new, including a new foundation that has been poured. Might be difficult to make out in this lighting, but this entire corner of the structure is encroaching on municipal right-of-way. This is one of the accessory buildings that has been built in the setback without a building permit and without a variance. Photographs of the interior show that all of the original structure and building systems have been removed.
Oh, 100%?
No.
From front to back, or did they keep a little bit so that they could?
You can make out there is one of the original walls standing inside, but it is structurally not sound, it's just propped up.
Okay.
And this was taken in the summer, late spring of last year. So I'm not sure if that wall is actually still standing. It is, okay. So the development variance permit application is asking for a reduction of the front setback to accommodate this new construction. And this does not include the encroachment or the 2 accessory buildings. A site visit has shown that this lot does contain a relatively large cleared and level buildable area. And staff has tried to work with the applicant to resolve the encroachment and the 2 non-complying accessory buildings before bringing this application to council, but the applicant has declined to resolve these issues. And as this issue has been brought up in previous applications, strongly not advisable to grant discretionary approvals where an application involves unresolved non-compliance. So with that, staff recommends that council reject this development variance permit application.
Okay.
Gary?
Okay, yeah, it's very complicated, and unfortunately, there's a lot of, the 25% is very subjective. And I think there is a part, and I tried to look it up today, but if you say you're gonna save 25% of the building and you get in there and it's rotten, there is a capacity to rebuild that part of it. I think the bigger issues here is whether the footprint has been expanded. That would be certainly a concern for me, which I would like to investigate, obviously. And the other one would be the encroachment issue onto the road allowance, which can be rectified. And that's historically, I believe the original building was also encroaching on that road allowance.
I just have a recent survey.
The thing about it is, if you investigate it, you can see the old, you can see the old floor, and if you drop a line down from the old floor, then you'll know exactly where that corner is. Now, if it has been expanded, obviously there's serious problems. If it hasn't been expanded, I think it would be good if we could get that back into a legal position and not be on our road allowance. The cottages will be moved, or the sheds can be moved. There's no problem with that, and they will be moved as a consideration, and that corner will be looked after. This is some information that I acquired, but I haven't had time to actually see the site. So I think it's imperative that council get there and have a site inspection and see exactly what the situation is, because there seems to be some disagreement on exactly what's going on there. That would be my feeling on it.
Okay, so can I just address some of the
Yes.
Yeah,
points there?
sure.
In terms of the non-conforming status or the grandfathering status,
Mhm.
the legislation is very clear on the 25%. There is some interpretation, you are correct, but the interpretation really comes down to what the building inspector accepts as 25% of the structural value above foundations. So that part is clear. It is only referring to the structural value above foundations. You can replace up to 75%. So even if the building does warrant replacement, like it's rotten or the systems are defective, once it's gone beyond 75%, you lose that status.
And the building
There's no
inspector obviously has confirmed this.
This is the interpretation. The building and the letter of the clause is that the building inspector determines the value.
Okay, so yes.
In this particular
Yes,
case,
yes.
it wasn't even a question.
So he has.
No, we
Well,
haven't.
he didn't need to because there was nothing close to
Well,
25%.
yeah,
So
that's very-
he put up a stop work order though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not taking good track, but I'll go to Melanie first and then Allison.
Point
and then I'll
of
come over.
clarification, for the map, do you have the right lot? Is it the lot that's like years, does it, the street map?
Yeah, so
This
this
is
is
above,
Scarborough.
but across the street, like the post boxes are on one side and it's on the other.
I believe they're over here, the mailboxes.
Do you have one of the street view of the
The
map?
topo, yeah.
Is it not on the other side?
So the-
Oh, sorry, I've got the map wrong, no, it is on the right corner, yes, okay. Yes,
Stares you in the
yes.
face as you make
Okay,
it.
yes. So yes, this has been an intriguing one. I've noticed the slow transformation of this one, of slowly the old cottage was taken down and then the building, and then it got encompassed by a new set of walls. So it definitely, I've noticed that the footprint has been extended. Yes, I've seen the transformation. So, okay, I understand.
Allison?
Well, as to the little tiny corner into the road allowance, I mean, this is a historical issue that we've got all over the island in these old areas. I mean, we've had one house where the house was built right on top of where the road allowance is in the map. And we were driving on somebody else's property on the public road. That's just one that comes to mind off the top of my head. And, you know, there's ways of dealing with that. I mean, there was a comment in the report about the road allowance being needed for future expansion or road work. I think I saw that somewhere. So I was wondering, since the public works, if somebody could elaborate as to what is needed, because I think it's a long way from the actual paved surface to this encroaching corner. So that's sort of one clarification question. I don't know if you want to answer them as we go along, because I've got a few.
Okay, maybe let's deal with that. Let's just
Yeah,
walk it through.
so,
Future use of road allowance?
So
Plan,
this,
future.
yeah, the visibility on this intersection is poor. So there will be improvements for safety reasons. I can't speak to exactly what those improvements are. Bob is in the audience. I'll also say this intersection is flagged also for pedestrian improvements in the transportation plan.
but what your map doesn't show is how far it is from the paved surface to the corner of the house.
At this point, I don't believe the municipality has any engineering design drawings for those improvements yet, so I
Okay,
can't tell
so
you exactly where they're located.
I'm totally supportive of, I guess, going to have a look at this before we make a decision as to whether we give it readings or whether we don't. I mean, if we want to give the DP notice reading today, then we can go on the walkabout. If there's an interest in actually rejecting the variance today, then I would be opposed to doing that before we actually went to look at it. So with the accessory buildings, the issue is, because accessory buildings can be right on the lot line, in my understanding. But is the issue the height solely with the accessory buildings?
Yes.
Okay, and with the, this 25%, is it the building code that has those rules and regulations in it? Where is this 25% legally thinking?
It's the Local Government Act non-conforming use, so it's division 14 and it's section 532, where it lays out when a non-conforming structure loses its non-conforming status. So it says that if more than,
So it has the 25%
so it
language in
says,
it?
if a building or structure, the use of which does not conform to provisions of the land use regulation bylaw is damaged or destroyed to the extent of 75% or more of its value above its foundations, as determined by the building inspector, the structure must not be repaired or reconstructed except for conforming use in accordance with the bylaw.
Okay, so getting back to Gary's question and just maybe, it's the decision of the building inspector, and because it uses value, it doesn't say square footage and things like that. It's a very subjective definition. So why was the stop work order issued? What were the reasons for issuing the stop work order?
I'll jump to that too. So the building permit that was issued was for internal renovations, no plumbing fixtures, no external alterations.
So the stop work order was issued because work was going on that was over and above what was in the building permit, not because anybody had come and made any decision that it was 2575 issued.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the stop work, and then it was when it was essentially trying to revise get a revised building permit. It was that it's no longer a.
Okay, so has the building inspector made a ruling or determination that that it's below 25% value?
I would say that was discussed at time of stop work order. I mean, it's not like the building inspector makes a ruling.
No,
per se,
but it's under the building code,
Yeah.
so the building inspector has to say, no, you've got to apply for a building permit for a whole new building, or you're applying for a permit for renovation or foundation fixing. So there's got to be some, so the building inspector really hasn't been too involved in any of this.
I don't know if that's extraneous to our discussion. I see a quizzical look on their planning department's face.
Well, I think the
as to
whole
what the
issue,
point here is.
part of the issue is if the footprint's been expanded, and it's hard to tell, then you're not building on the same footprint, which is my understanding if you're doing to prevent somebody from fixing foundations or something. So it's a value, 25% of the value is, if I'm hearing what Daniel's quoting, and that's under the Local Government Act. And I think he said as determined by the building inspector. I thought I heard that somewhere. So has the building inspector actually put his mind to, is there 25% of the value still there or not?
Okay.
And that's, you know, that's, I think it's a very subjective thing, because it doesn't say, well, if you had 1,000 square feet, yeah, but if the building footprint's been expanded, then that's a different situation.
Okay, I'm going to go to Daniel. I've got you on the list, Melanie, you're after Maureen.
So I'd just say sort of twofold. So one, it's like the building physically has been expanded so that the expansion parts don't have any non-conforming structure,
Right.
Grandfathering. The other one is I would say, 3 of the exterior of the 4 exterior walls are gone. The entire internal finishing is gone, the roof is gone. So, I would be challenged to see an argument that would say 25% of the value above the foundation is remaining.
But I do think that's a determination for the building inspector.
Okay, I'll go to Maureen and then Suellen.
Thanks. In your report, Emma, in the conclusion, you say staff recommend that council reject this application based on lack of hardship and something else. Has there actually been a discussion of lack of hardship
With the applicant?
with the applicant?
That's the wording in the application, is that they do not have anywhere else to put the building on the site.
And your counter to that is that there is an
On
alternative
the
site?
site visit, it was clear there was definitely space on the site.
Is hardship only related to the siting, or could it be related to
Cost?
the investment that's already being made in the foundation and the framing that's being done?
I think hardship is a question for council to determine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then go to Suellen.
My take on this is similar to some that we have seen in the past where people have built without building permits, and I think we should uphold our bylaws, and I'll be speaking in support of this variance, and I'll be thinking about,
In support of the variance?
I'll be supporting the recommendation that staff have put in front of us, and that and I think about precedents that we would be setting all over the island, and some of the other, how many times in the future would councils be needing to deal with this. So I'm interested in what staff have proposed as their recommendation.
And just before I go around the table again, I'd like to jump in. I'm very much in favor of the recommendation. This is one of those things where they've done so many things wrong. You can grab it, well, what about this, well, what about that, what about that? This is building without a permit, applying for a renovation permit, and then building a new structure, right? That in and of itself is enough reason. There's encroachment right up to the very edge of the property line. I mean, this isn't getting close. Yeah, it's actually over our property line. It's a main road, it's a main corner. 50 years from now, the last thing you need is this bloody house sticking out over the street, where you're putting in sidewalks and all the other stuff that will come to Bowen Island eventually, quite possibly. So it's so tight. It's not a lot where they are up cheek by jowl with some cliff and there's just no other way around it. There's other place to put it. It strikes me as a very obvious attempt to get away with something, to apply for an interior renovation permit and then rebuild a new house. And I think it's flagrant, and I do not believe that we should even think about allowing something like this, where we're just going to get more of it. There are some jurisdictions where they're fighting with people trying to build without permits all the time, and there are other jurisdictions where it's unheard of. And I would rather us be a place where it's unheard of, because the council just doesn't let you get away with it. So anyway, that's my thoughts on this subject. I'm going to go back. I believe Melanie was next, and we'll come around the table this way.
You know what, I'm happy to move the recommendation if anybody wants to second it.
Okay, let's do that, and then we'll have more discussion before I call the question. So, motion.
Move it, I'll second it.
seconded. Okay, it's moved and seconded, so before I call the question, further discussion, I just want to go down to Emma. She had her hand up there for a second. Did you want to continue that?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to the fact that these non-compliance issues, once a discretionary approval is granted, there is absolutely no obligation or motivation on the applicant's part to resolve these issues, as I think we're all aware of from previous applications. So I do agree with comments made by Councillor Anders and Councillor Morse regarding the encroachment and the 2 non-compliant accessory buildings. They can be easily removed, easily. And I bring that up now because that discussion was had with the applicant to have those issues resolved before bringing the variance to council. That was made very clear and the applicant refused. So just want to bring that to everyone's attention. That is the approach that the applicant is taking for this application.
So I'm going to Gary next.
It's obviously a very contentious issue here, and I don't think we should go forward without, I'm not happy making a decision. If in fact the foundation has been expanded, then I don't have a problem going forward with the thing as it stands. But I don't know that, and I have to. I think something this contentious, I think council should have a look at it, do a site visit before we make a decision. That's my personal opinion. That's the way I'll vote. Also, as far as hardship, it's probably $50,000 now to move that foundation. If he decides to do it, I don't know. He'd probably just, I don't know, sell it and move on. But anyway, that's where I stand on it.
Allison?
I am going to make a motion to defer because I think we should have a look at it before we make a decision. So I move that council defer, recommend voting on, what's the right wording? Defer until after a site visit has been held.
Okay, do I have a seconder for deferment?
Defer consideration until after a site visit has been held.
Okay, I have a seconder for it. Any discussion before I call? What's that? Oh, okay. All in favor of deferment? Those opposed? Okay. So the motion stands as it is now. Any further discussion before I call the question on the main resolution? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask the question, because I've listened to it go around the table, and I understand, by the way, the difficulties you've had, and I'm very concerned when people refuse to do something which is obviously in their interest before it comes to council. I mean, that's really rather blatant. But the fact is, where does that leave us? If this motion is approved, and believe me, I can understand the strength of the argument, what next?
They have to remove the frame, right?
Or even go to board variance.
We're rejecting their application for the development variance permit. Period. So where that goes from there is in the hands of staff. Right? I mean, that's where council has the power to give a variance permit. And if council decides not to give a variance permit, we give it back to staff and they deal with it as per our bylaws.
Or as Councillor Amber indicated, the Board of Variance.
Or a board of variance if they have their hardship case. Okay. So this is further discussion before I call the question on the rejection of the DEP. And you wanted to speak to that, Melanie?
Yeah, I just have got, so from staff point of view, it's quite clear that they have expanded the footprint. Yes, I mean, that very much ties in with my observations I've seen over the last year, I think so. But it's, you've gone and you've physically measured from the old wall to the...
Well, what they've actually done, they built the new walls outside of the old walls before they knocked down the old walls, so we didn't even have to measure, just see that it was outside, and then they poured new foundation outside of the old foundation, so there's no measurement needed. You can still see the old foundation.
Okay. So I think Call the question. All in favor of rejecting the DVP? Okay, we have 4 in favor of it. Those opposed? And we have 3 opposed. Okay, so the DVP is rejected. Okay.
May I just ask a question? The applicant has the option at this point of removing the accessory buildings and coming into compliance with that part of the issue. And the applicant also has the option of bringing back to council a request for a variance permit.
So yeah, they could reapply with a revised application.
Having demonstrated at least some good intentions by dealing with the accessory building issue. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So next up, we have Daniel. Planning Department priorities, always a fun subject.
Yeah. So thank you, Mayor and Council. So I don't have very much of a presentation, but essentially what I wanted to bring is, so last council meeting, council adopted the island plan, which had a number of strategic priorities that relate to planning, as well as we have a couple other outstanding directions from council to report back on. And so what I'm really looking for at this time is some sort of priority ranking from council, so that we know if we go and do sort of the research needed to bring one of these items forward to council, that's the one that council would like to see come back first. We don't bring back a couple of them and say, well, what about this other priority that's also been identified? And so in the report, I list some of the island plan items that I've sort of flagged as having planning department input, as well as a couple of the other things, so just from the last council meeting, reporting back on cannabis in the medical clinic. I also put in a late item attachment, the current development applications that we have before us, and so flagging that, sort of to weigh them both in terms of weight council would like us to place on strategic priorities versus current development applications. And then what I tried to flag too is just, is it something that's identified in the island plan, is it something that's underway, and trying to give a rough, some sort of sense of time for it, which is always a little vague. So some of them I've given, how long do I think it's going to take to bring it just to first reading, so to do the background information, do sort of the background consultation, to bring it back to council, versus some, and maybe more confident saying, okay, this is how much more we have left to do.
Okay. If I could just jump in here for a minute at the beginning. I would suggest that anything that is underway, we will carry on with. Right? We have 3 things there that are underway now, and the rest are not underway. So I would think, rather than abandoning anything in midstream, that we carry on with those things that are underway. Do we have sort of a general consensus at the table on that? And then, no? You'd like to drop something that's underway?
Yeah, I'm, looking at the list, it's a long list. I agree generally with the idea of continuing on with the Integrated Transportation Management Plan. That's what ITMP is, in case anybody's watching.
Master plan.
Integrated Transportation.
Master plan.
Thank you. And then the subdivision and servicing bylaw. Both of these have been in the works for years. I think this servicing and subdivision bylaw is like 6 years or something. And so those 2 I would really consider going ahead with. And but I would put lot 1 in a different category. That's one that only 3 of the councillors here have been party to in meetings, and maybe the CAO. But lot 1, having had 8 meetings, according to what I found on the website. I was wondering why I hadn't seen much about it. It's had 8 meetings, 7 of which have been closed to the public, and there's no minutes there. I just think there's more public process needed there, and that we have an opportunity to work more better together, as we have on many other projects. And so I think that one needs more time, and I would drop it lower on the list, so the public can be involved as well.
Okay, I'm going to go to Allison first, and
I
Maureen.
had my hand up before you said I'm going to jump in
So
here.
did I.
Well, so did Allison.
So looking at it from what's going to help us out best and most in the long run, clearly, we've been at this IPMP for I don't know how long now, so it's got to get finished, or just discarded, one or the other, so let's finish it. And we've got to have the discussion about how or when or if it can get funded. Then, if you look at the cannabis report hasn't started, but it's federal and provincial legislation, and we are gonna have to be ready to act. So I think that's a timeline that's been foisted upon us that we have to deal with. And if you look at the development procedures bylaw, that's gonna make staff's life easier if they can just hand to somebody that's coming in and saying, what do I have to do in order to get my rezoning? Well, here's our bylaw, you've got to, be ready for that, and no argument. And then development fees bylaw sort of falls out of that, and are we actually collecting enough money from development for the time it's taking to deal with these things? Subdivision servicing bylaw, clearly we should get finished. And the LUB housekeeping, I think there's some things in there that we keep cropping up and keep causing us problems because we gotta do DVPs and stuff that if we fix the section, we might not have to. So, which is, so that one I'm sort of not sure. The Lot 1 rezoning we've started. I think we should keep working on it. And the other is the Lot 3, the medical clinic. It's clearly a need that the community wants, and we've given, approval to it. So I think, that's probably something. And then I guess my other question is looking at all these, have you got the other chart on it?
I didn't put it on the PowerPoint.
Yeah. So how much time does staff, I did a quick add and I got 11 weeks if I added Daniel's thing. We're hiring a new staff person. If we get the ITMP finished, maybe we put them in priority order, but I guess the other is the length of time it will take to do some. And so I think the second to the dock bylaw and this site alteration, which I thought was what it was, not steep slope, those are going to take a long time with public consultation and stuff. Not in actual hours, but in time frame for referrals and everything else. So I would leave those. And then the Lot 2 comprehensive planning, I think that really is more on dealing with how we go forward and where we put the affordable housing if we can do something with BC Housing. So that may not be as long a time frame as we're talking about. So those are my ramblings, I guess. But the other question is, how much time does staff need to be responsive and turn around in a reasonable period of time applications from, property owners for DVPs and rezonings and that kind of stuff?
Okay.
And there was a few things missing in that report because it didn't sort of say the things that are sitting there, they're on hold because of the applicants asking, and then I have no idea what was started and what's been finished in the last 6 months or a year.
Okay. Yeah, I guess everybody's going to take a shot at this for a minute,
And
then we'll try to narrow it down into this discussion. Yes. I'm going to go to Maureen first. Or Melanie, sorry, go ahead.
So, Council Morris has brought up some of the issues that I wanted to. So are you wanting us to be able to rate these from high priority to low, so stagnant, or figure out if anything needs to drop off? So those are my two questions. Like, what's the objective? Are we to start to rank these, like Kenneth's report, #1, Love House #2?
Yeah. So I would think, they're all things that council has directed us to do. So I'm not asking council to drop things that they've said are priorities, but more to rank. And as Alice said, there's sort of, if you add up all the time, but then some of them have lags in terms of they go to council, right? So it's like there's a build up to council report, and then there's a lag because it's till the council meeting comes. I don't do anything.
Okay.
So it's not like we can only focus on one or two things, but the ranking is next. So if I know that there's now time, I need to start scheduling in the next thing. So even it doesn't need to be I mean, it could be 1 to 11, or it could be these ones, and then these ones, and then these ones.
So would that be helpful for us to have that conversation around that ranking today?
Yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to point is we'll all be looking at this with our own priorities, the things we've been working on, but another lens to apply is what the community would be wanting us to focus on. And so we've had lots of feedback about affordable housing as an issue, so I think that's something else we need to look at when we're, it's a different lens, is what would be the priorities. If we had the community sitting in there, I think they perhaps would have a view on that. So I'd like to put that lens in as well when we're looking at the ranking.
Maureen?
I did some of the same kind of review as Councillor Morse did, and adding it all of the time up, it's 360 hours, which, as we said, is round about 11 weeks work for one person. If we've got 3 planners on stream as of March, that's 420 hours a month. Over the 10 months through to Christmas, that's 4,200 hours of work available. So when I first looked at this list, my first impulse was, is there anything that needs to be knocked off the list? And I think that when you add up the time available, and you add up the time that it's going to take to complete these tasks, nothing should come off that list. There ought to be time to do everything that's up there. And then when it comes to prioritizing some of the things that have already been mentioned, there's also, taking into consideration whether something is easy to do or hard to do. There is, how long has it been on the list? If it's been on the list since 2014 and it actually is important, then it stays on the list. The consequences of not doing something is something we have to take into account. If there's something on that list that is an important priority for this council, and there's any doubt about the next council taking it on as a priority, then that makes it something that we should be paying close attention to. And then, some of them are rabbit holes, and you could spend an enormous amount of time on them. So sort of tracking the time that's being spent on these various projects. I don't think that that's currently done, but given this kind of structure, it might be worthwhile to start doing that, given the pressure that we're under to complete things prior to a new council coming in. And I agree with Councillor Mason in that some of these are more important to the community than others. But for me, the bottom line is they're all priorities. I would like to see them all get done. And I think there's time to do that. And probably what would help me would be to see some sort of Gantt chart where you're showing where the periods of activity, to the best you can, where the periods of activity are going to be associated with each of the items. Because some of them you'll start and spend 2 hours, and then there's 3 months before you come back to it. And I'd like to get a sense of the rhythm of that work so we can revisit and assess whether it's going according to plan. With the last island plan, we did a good job up front of putting in place priorities. What we didn't do was at various points during the year systematically go back and look and see where we were at with those different priorities, and there was some slippage as a result. So I really would like to see this tightened up considerably in terms of progress monitoring.
Okay, I'm going to go to Gary first and then Michael.
Yeah, I agree with what's being said here. Obviously, all these items, it would be nice to get them all completed before our term ends, which is 6 or 7 months from now. It's not going to happen, so I think we should prioritize in some shape or description. The cannabis report, that's going to be legislation, and we're going to have to deal with that sooner than later. Lot 1 rezoning, which is almost complete, but should try to get completed, the phase 2 dock bylaws, and the site alteration can slip down in my thinking only because they're not real high priority. And I think that's what we have to do, is kind of get stuff in order. Finish up the ITMP. The procedures bylaws are going to be ongoing, and the medical clinic, I think, also should be a high priority. And I know the importance of the subdivision and the development fees and that sort of thing, but I think we should prioritize this list and start working at it, because if we don't get stuff finished, we want to make sure we get the most important of the priorities. Which is
I'm going to go to Michael and then I'm going to jump in.
Listen, from a management point of view, I have to say, for me, this raises some really serious concerns. What the takeaway is for everybody on the Muni team is that everything that they've heard, which I think makes just a ton of sense. The risk of all of this is that we respond to the latest kick in the shins, which means that some of the really important housekeeping work gets kicked further down the road and doesn't get done. To Alison's point, I would like to leave it more contextually, that they take it away with all the information that they've been given, and I think there is far more consensus than there is disagreement. Come up with their best approach to make sure that we don't lose some important work which has been hanging fire for all too long. There is always a latest priority, and the trouble is it tends to go right up to the top of the list, forcing other important items down, and we lose the balance required. So to be a well-oiled machine, I think they need to take it away, think about how this may best be achieved, quietly in their own arenas, because they've had sufficient input from council, all of which I think have been valid. So given the consensus we've got, I'd like to hand it back to them so they could look at this and make sure that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, just in our urgency to respond to the latest hot topic.
I'm going to jump in now, if I may. Okay, I'd like to try to knock a few hours off this if possible, right? And so let's look at the medical clinic, Lot 3 medical clinic. I think that's pretty much in their hands now. They're going to come back to us and say how big their building's going to be, how they're going to pay for it, where they've got their foundations, at what.
No, this is why one of the
Okay,
things I'm
good.
suggesting is, sorry, that I work with the planning consultant on this one, because there is a huge amount of planning time involved. Well, a huge amount.
Even though they don't have a building yet, even though they don't have.
Yeah, we have to.
Well, we have a motion essentially for staff to report back on the medical clinic, so. we'd be
But
good to go.
how can we? If we don't know if they're building 4,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet.
And be working with them,
To
but
make that-
but
to
to
help
do it,
make
but
that
it's.
I mean, I appreciate that once they've got their charitable status, which I think, you know, that foundation status, this is sort of, they're nothing without that. And they've put together enough of their funding that they know how big a building they want to get. Then we get, and we have to do it in conjunction with the fire hall to figure out how much land. I mean, when it's going to take time, it's going to take time, but I don't think that time has to be now.
I'm meeting with Tim Rhodes at 4 o'clock today, and he's chomping at the bit.
Okay,
By
okay,
phone.
fair enough. So
So why I thought we could take that off the table is, there is our deputy approving officer. I'll work with her on that project. I think the other thing with pulling that out of our staff's planning priorities is the society will see what kind of actual funds that the municipality will be spending on this project. I'm expecting probably, between the subdivision, at least 10 hours, probably 15 hours every time.
okay, so as far as the medical center is concerned, then it can be done with outside staff
Correct.
rather than using the
Correct,
planning department.
yes.
So the medical center could be, if need be.
But that is a budget line item,
Yes,
unless we're doing it on a cost recovery basis. which
no,
was
it's a budget line item, but that's one reason I wanted to bring it up today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's something,
Yeah, we have to consider.
yeah.
Okay. Another one that I was looking at is the cannabis report. My understanding is that what is being suggested is that we don't allow in our zoning bylaw any cultivation or distribution or retail sales of cannabis, and that
Of production.
yeah, anything to do with it, and then spot zone it later so that we don't have any grandfathering situation further down the road. We don't have laws against it now, people start doing it, problems develop, and then we've got a problem later. So it's pretty simple. It's all prohibited.
It's still rezoning. It's still
No, I
rezoning.
appreciate that. It's a thing, but as far as the number of hours involved, if we don't take it too seriously, if we simply prohibit it, it should be fairly straightforward.
Well, if we can get that consensus from council right now, that would save a lot of time.
Because I think our current motion is to report back.
Yeah.
And so it'd be, well, the research and reporting back and giving options, and then proceeding with the option that's chosen.
Right.
So
Yeah,
is it easy to go and do a quick survey of what has been happening in some of the other communities and just
Yes,
pull
we'll
their
go to
bylaw?
Maureen and then
We
Sue on
have
that.
we have the one-line amendment to the
That-
land use bylaw from Tofino.
Yeah, I
That
researched
could be
that,
used.
circulated it, it's one line added to the land use bylaw. It just says,
Under the general prohibition,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
uses in all zones not allowed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair enough. Does that work for us, guys?
Mhm.
Is there any need to belabor this one?
I don't think so.
I'd still would like to hold, I don't mind it falling right to the bottom, but just so it still stays on, just in case something crops up, I don't mind.
No,
No, we're
No,
gonna-
I think you're
we're
proposing-
gonna rezone now. I mean, when it's approved, we will amend our
Yeah.
bylaw to prohibit. And that is done until an application is made by somebody to do something. And then they will have to be dealt with as rezoning, spot rezonings
Yeah.
then. But it's kind of a housekeeping thing as opposed to a philosophical thing.
I don't mind the approach being, that we're discussing, but I just think keeping the cannabis report at the bottom, just in case we do need to provide one for community education, whatever. So, I mean, if it's one of those things that perhaps doesn't get done, fine, but I just think maybe just
Right.
keeping a safety net underneath there.
But if we
Okay, I'm
don't,
gonna hold it a second, let Dan.
That's my comment.
first.
If council doesn't agree, that's fine.
I want to
but,
refer back to staff whenever
Sure.
possible.
So in this, I'm just looking at the work plan I put together for the various hours, and so for this, I had do the research of legislation communities, come back with options for council, and then take the chosen option to do bylaw changes. If council direction is to bring back bylaws that just prohibit it, then that cuts me a step, and I'll just be bringing bylaws back. But with the research still, background information, if council wants to do a different direction at that point, but I can do that.
I move that council direct staff to prepare an amendment to the land use bylaw to prohibit cannabis. And I'm looking for this in my email and can't find it.
similar to the Tofino
Similar to
bylaw?
the Tofino.
Cultivation,
Bylaw.
production, or
It had to
distribution.
be the right wording, so
Yeah.
similar to the Tofino bylaw.
I've got the
Oh,
wording.
thank you.
The wording is, no person shall use any land, building, or structure for the sale, production, or distribution of cannabis.
Pretty
That's what I
straightforward.
move.
That's pretty well written.
Second.
And the seconder on that?
Yeah.
Is there any discussion before I call the question?
You know, it's great, I agree, that's the approach we should take, but what about, I guess is there like a no smoking thing?
Oh, that's.
Like,
What do you mean?
well, if we prohibit smoking in, like, buildings, like this building here, should we be doing that also?
Why are we talking about smoking?
Well, because it's smoking pot.
Yeah.
So,
Public places.
right now,
Yeah.
you know, you can't smoke cigarettes in this building.
Yeah.
And any of the public buildings.
Right, but at this point, what we're talking about is our planning department staff time. Right, let's not get into the weeds here. If we want. Unintended.
Into the weed, you mean.
Those are the best times, yeah.
Into the
No,
weed.
you know, you understand what I'm saying, Gary. Not that I don't want to talk about that, but I don't think that this is the.
Okay, and that's fine, I'm just saying, we just gotta cover everything.
That's another issue we are going to have to deal with.
Yes, and that's fair enough.
But this is just the land use
But right
bylaw.
now, we're talking about hours of time.
Sure. Fine.
Okay? So, okay.
I was just gonna
once
say,
we-
when I bring first reading, I can bring other changes, other bylaw changes to be made.
Okay, awesome, great.
And a
thank you.
little rationale that this doesn't mean that somebody
Yeah,
can't apply for
for sure.
rezoning.
Encourage
to
spot
have-
rezoning.
for-
Yeah.
Yeah.
All in favor? Okay, so that is passed unanimously.
That's got that off.
Great.
Let's say, what's next?
I think on the, my site alteration steep slopes bylaw, that is something where we got quite a good report done by a student or something a year or so ago. It gave lots of reference to other jurisdictions.
Good
We now
practice.
have a map that shows us where we have this 30% grade.
Uh-huh.
And I think it can be a very, very simple bylaw. So
And who's
I'm willing to
opinion?
work on that and bring forward a report to council and to the planning department at a
If we,
future date.
I'm totally opposed to starting phase 2 dock bylaw or site alteration steep slope bylaw because they are long in a total time of amount of public information meetings, acrimony, debate over the accuracy of the maps and everything else. And,
Do it differently this time.
no. And so if we want to get the other things done that we've started, and, you know, then I think those should be put on the back burner and, because we won't, it's just not. You've got to look at it realistic, that anything you want to do, you basically have to be ready to have fourth reading in the beginning of September. And so if you look at, you got March, April, May, June, July, and August. That's 6 months, 4 weeks per month, 7 hours a day, times 3 staff. So that's 504 hours of available time if I've done my arithmetic right. 24 weeks,
Well, I know, there's a lot of assumptions in there.
168 hours. No, there isn't. 3 hours. That's 504 hours of staff time. And they've got to fit their vacations in there
I
too.
think,
So-
I'm going to interrupt you just for 1 second as far as the assumptions you're making. The subdivision servicing bylaw does not have to have fourth reading by September. Right?
Yes, it does.
The
It's been
development
on the
fees
books
bylaw-
for
no,
months,
but it can
years.
be-
It
can
needs to be
October,
finished.
It can be November. It's not going to drop off the table because it doesn't have first reading.
Can we leave this one aside and go through that, if you've got any other easy wins, and then come back maybe tomorrow?
Could I just maybe give a little context here that might help with the discussion? Is Daniel, how much of staff's time is spent, and I think Allison alluded to this, on applications that come in, you know, the public service side of it? You know, how much actual
Yeah.
time do you have for strategic priorities? How much?
I know I tracked it. I started tracking early 2016 for several months, and probably 2/3 of my time, maybe more than that.
And it's not in your head as well.
Yeah.
I mean, some of that will be alleviated by the new
Yeah,
junior
and that's my
planner,
hope.
but there's a.
But the reality is, yeah, majority of time is development inquiries and
Yeah.
applications.
Thank you.
But I think the objective here, as I understand it from the beginning, was to prioritize and to look at, through the lens of what's most important to the community and what we have to get done. So, sorry,
So
Allison.
speaking to the subdivision servicing bylaw, yes, the sooner we get that done, the more time staff is going to have to do these other things, because it is something where they can hand it to people, it's all laid out, it's detailed, it's here, you don't have to keep coming and bothering me, you don't have to keep coming and asking Public Works what I'm supposed to do, it's all laid out for you, and it is going to make staff's life a lot simpler, and give them more time to do other things. And the public knows what they're getting into. So that is something that I would like to see approved and passed by May or June, not waiting to give it fourth reading in September. To me, that one's got, it's so far down the piece, it got done and then it keeps getting dropped because it's an internal thing, it's not the sexy application and all that other stuff. So I think that to me is the top priority, along with getting the ITMP done and finished, because we've spent so much time on it, it's dragging on.
Okay, I think this has to overlay into the Maureen's point about the Gantt chart, about where do we timeline all of this? You've got 10 hours that has to be done within the next 3 weeks, but then nothing happens only for 2 months, right? So you will have periods of.
So you give them more than one thing. But
Yes, a
I
great
wouldn't
rush
put the
and then.
dock bylaw or the steep slopes in one of the things they should even be thinking about.
Yes, no, I know that, and it probably has been your position for a number of years now. But anyway, the,
Can we do, maybe go through and maybe put like a star, 2 stars, 3 stars? So we can have some that float to the top and some that float to the bottom?
Maybe we could all get dots for
well, I
dots.
know that, I think the problem with that, Melanie, is that there's a lot of politics in
Yeah.
this room
I know, but we have to
associated with
kind
all
of-
of these.
yeah.
I know, but then you're gonna get these 4-3 votes, and then it
But maybe we
puts
can
in
come
vote.
back to
Well,
those.
then if you got 4-3 voting, gets deferred. and
Well, I know, but we could be
do
here
the one where
for,
we
we
got
could
7
be here
votes.
for 7 hours doing it.
Thank you. I had just had the initial question and a couple of points just relating to the 3 that you brought up, Murray. So I appreciate the option to speak again. I won't speak long because everybody's brought up all kinds of great points. I like what Michael said about leaving staff to take these comments and letting staff organize it. There is time there, as others have pointed out, and it's more of a matter of prioritization. And there are also estimates, and we don't know what's going to come zooming down the pike at us too, like affordable housing options. There might be something that shows up suddenly, and that would be lot 2, I assume, or where is affordable
Yes.
housing on here is my question.
Lot
Yes.
2 and 1.
Lot 2 and maybe 1. Okay, and because to me, I appreciate Michael's point about let's let management do their job and figure out how it all fits together. I don't want to go into a vote on every line on there. I think it's all doable, and I think they're estimates, and I like the idea of letting staff figure it out. And I like the point about putting the medical center into the consulting planner, because then we can track it. I thought that was a good idea.
Sorry. Medical center to consult on the cannabis report, the one-liner that we've already agreed on. Those are 2 things that we've accomplished here today. I think we have very general agreement that the ITMP has to be done soon.
Yes.
I believe that the Lot 2 comprehensive planning probably has to become a bigger thing that we've been thinking of because of the BC housing potential for that project, and we want to be ready for it if it comes down the line. Now, it may turn out in April that there's an election call, nothing happened, everything went, and that may move back down the list if that project isn't coming. But I'd like to see us putting quite a bit of priority and time into getting a process in place so that we'll be able to say, yes, that's how many units it
Do
should
we
be, and
have
that's where it should be.
consensus? I'm in total agreement with that, so can we get consensus on that?
That lot 2 affordable housing move up near the top of the list.
Can we?
Well, I don't know, Melanie, in that.
I'm just saying I'm in agreement,
I-
I'm just wondering if others support what you're
I
saying.
know, but if we do that with that one, there's going to be the next item on the list and the next and the next, right? And if we start going through all of them, we're
But
going to get around the
maybe, but the
table on
good
each
thing
one.
though is that if we have things where we've got consensus from council, then that also supports it being a priority.
Let's try that one. Okay, we'll go to Allison in the Gary.
So Lot 2, comprehensive planning, there is already zoning in Lot 2
Yes.
for
Partial.
attached housing.
Yes.
Yes, so is there some feeling that that's not where BC Housing wants to put the plan? I mean, is the only real issue for Lot 2 comprehensive planning is the access to the back part of the lot? Because if we're dealing with this it's already zoned for multifamily.
Right.
And if somebody doesn't like that spot for the multifamily, if BC Housing says, no, we don't like that spot, then I don't see that we need to spend any time. If BC Housing likes that spot and the zoning's already in place, then that's where the BC Housing project's gonna go.
It's a big spot for the amount of houses.
Yeah, but the way it's laid out and the way the zoning's done, you don't have to build the whole thing, you just have to build some of it.
No, but it needs to be planned.
Well,
But
there's drawings already.
in a general sense for the larger area.
No,
right?
there's drawings
So-
in for that whole site for the rezoning, and it's already drawn out when we went through the rezoning process, and the zoning
For what-
specifically is there for something that would fit the BC Housing's definition for attached housing, for affordable housing.
I'll let Maureen speak to this.
To some extent, what the Lot 2 comprehensive planning refers to is not just the zoning element of a discussion, but a community discussion. Because I think people have really forgotten 4 years ago. I mean, if you look at the turnover of people on this island, people don't remember what has been done in terms of zoning there. And there also are other interests that are coming to the forefront about could that lot be used for other purposes. The potential expansion of space for the community center, the interest in having a skate park, the interface between Snug Cove House and the part that is zoned for multifamily residential, where Bowen Court might fit into that. So it's I think initially a conversation rather than just a discussion of this is what the zoning is, and bringing the community along with us. We may, when we remember, we may have a good sense of what the zoning is there, but others don't.
So that's just an education thing, that's not.
Yep.
Yes,
An
very well,
education,
very
an
much
education
so.
thing takes time,
Yeah.
and it takes repetition for people to grasp. And how it relates to the Lot 1 rezoning. I mean, part of the reason we're getting some kickback on aspects of the Lot 1 rezoning is because people forget that there's that big chunk of land in Lot 2 that already is zoned appropriately. So those two things are a community conversation going forward, not just a council.
And we are, I mean, people love how much this council has accomplished. People don't feel, I mean, we've done so much that people are starting to feel left out of the process, that the council has gone ahead and done it and the process is lacking. And I think that it behooves us for these last 6 or 7 months to have a good deal of community conversation, a good deal of community process, particularly around affordable housing. That thing has grown to be such a huge issue over the last 3 years that if we go into an election and we have said, oh, well, we figured that out years ago, don't worry about it, that won't fly. I mean, that's, so I appreciate the planning department time is going to be sucked into that process inevitably, but I personally think that from that community focus, that community lens, we better be there. Okay, go to Melanie and then Gary.
So can I just summarize what we've got now? What I'm feeling is that there's support for the subdivision servicing bylaw and the ITMP to float to the top. And then we need to have some big ones in there, which would be looking at the community lands, and I think they need to go in tandem. So the Lot 1 rezoning and Lot 2 comprehensive planning.
Yes.
If one will inform the other. You can't, I don't think you can separate the two. I'm hoping.
That's a good point. That's very good.
So,
Yeah.
It's comprehensive planning for Lot 1 and Lot 2.
Yeah.
Truly, because this is complicated. And not only is it complicated, but we have a churn in terms of the people who are reviewing it, because we've got new people on the island. The priorities churn, because they just have, as said in the last few years, housing has come to the fore. So at some stage, we are going to have to try and group all this together. The Thursday meeting, I'm sure, will be helpful, because I'm not surprised people are generally confused. I think, it'd be easy to say sometimes we are. So therefore, anything we can do to clarify this and communicate it is going to be helpful. And it will be time consuming, and I take the repetition point very seriously, because it's not going to be a one email tells all. So we're stuck with it.
so then, and we've got the cannabis report and Lot 3 that's fallen down.
Yeah.
So,
So that's,
so do we then just need to rank what's left?
I think.
No,
these are-
no.
Okay, well, do we,
I
is that
think-
enough guidance from council?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, then I think that gives me clarity in terms of, like, proceed with Lot 1, which is straightforward, because it's sort of, a lot of those hours are all the committee meetings, which are already
Right.
booked and
But I
proceed
would-
with. Lot 2 to start with, to finish the 2, and probably bringing back a quick cannabis report in terms of the bylaws so it can get in place by July. What I'm then sort of left with is that, okay, when then time frees up between those, what sort of is the next realm? Is it sort of the planning, the land use bylaw development procedures fees, or phase 2 dog course, deep slope?
Where did you put the subdivision servicing bylaw and the ITM?
Sorry, those were both like to be completed, like focus like
Yeah.
those.
Okay. I think for the dock bylaw and the steep slopes, for the moment, can be left, don't get into it yet.
Okay.
Okay? And then let me do some, I see these as being much, much simpler things than everybody else sees them at, and maybe I'm just being naive. So I will work with Chris Murdy and look at other people's bylaws and see if we can come up with easy templates and that sort of thing. And if we can't, and it's going to be this huge thing, then I might end up getting shot down on it. But let me take a shot at that, because I appreciate the number of hours that are being put beside that of 75 planning hours is a hell of a lot for those 2 items, and I appreciate that.
I'd be concerned about running up legal fees budget bylaw at this point. I think I can give you a 2-inch thick file and you can read through that to start for free.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Just a couple of points on the site alteration steep slope bylaw. I mean, we do have a building department, and if you bring your plans in there, there's a topo in there. I look at the topo and they say, yes, you need a geotech. So I mean, that part of it is covered, and I understand that it's a lot more involved than that, and clear cutting lots and stuff like that. But I don't see, a 30-degree slope doesn't mean anything if you're working straight off bedrock. You know, that's a totally different thing. Anyway, I don't want to get involved there, but it just to say that I don't think that's a high priority right now. I do like what Allison's saying, like in the subdivision servicing bylaw, yeah, it's 20 hours, but if you can do that 20 hours and save 40, save 40 going forward, and that's a decision that the planning department can put together, and as part of this priority list. I guess that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, we've taken over 100 hours right now. I mean, it's not, those 70 hours and those 2 things aren't necessarily gone, but for as far as ranking priorities today, we've pulled 100 hours out of their 360 or whatever. So,
I guess my only other comment would be before you go and have a meeting with Chris Murdy, maybe we should make a decision here and then take it to Chris if there's some contentious items. We seem to be spending a lot of time on legal matters.
Yeah, I'm not talking thousands of dollars. So, but I think that was a very gracious compromise on my part. So, don't
Yes and no.
push it.
Yes and no.
So noted.
Okay.
I left a number out in my calculation. It should have been 2,500.
So, oh, I'm sorry, Maureen.
If Dan over here.
Yes, Daniel's here.
Sorry.
It's like a genie.
Is there anything more you need from us at this point?
I think this has been very helpful. I think it's to proceed, and then we may check in again, and February we may check in April and say,
It's an
this is
update.
where it stands now, and do you want us to start other things, or
That would be great.
Give us an update, yeah.
I hope this is not planning speak. This has been very helpful.
No,
Meaning I am even more confused than when I first walked into this room.
He kept eye contact.
Okay. Can we close the book on that one?
Please.
Okay. Moving right along. Metro Vancouver, Councillor Nicholson.
Just a sec, we're just checking is this Candace one? I'll send you an email.
No, there was a recommendation on that planning, but we don't need to vote on that.
No.
Metro? Yeah, Metro. Included in your agenda package is a summary of the Metro Vancouver requisitions. I requested an update. We'd received a version of this a couple of years ago from Carol Mason, and her CFO updated it for 2016, 2017, and 2018. So it gives you a sense of what it's been over that 6-year period. The requisition that's proposed for 2018 is just under $100,000, which is an increase of about 14. I think I explained in my email that was as a result primarily of an investment in regional parks for acquisition purposes. The Metro Parks is getting a little concerned about, they're getting more than a little concerned. They were concerned about how little land there was available in Metro as a whole for park expansion and the projected additional 1 million people who are going to be here by 2040. So this was a kind of protracted discussion, and then ultimately a commitment from the board to increase the parks budget for acquisitions. And the other thing that is new on this budget is a line item for affordable housing that hasn't been part of the Metro budget in the past. And it basically is a dollar was levied to build up a reserve fund so that by the time the Metro Vancouver Housing Corporation has its 10-year plan pulled together, that there'll be a couple $1 million in place for moving forward with some work there. Are there any questions of the acquisition?
It's fine, thank you, by the way, and I appreciate the history. So, Bowen owes Metro $99,000.
Yes.
Now, do we just write one check? How does this get paid?
It's on your tax notice.
I know it's on the, so yes.
One check.
It's on the tax notice, so it gets collected, rather like Island Trust. It's the same
Exactly, it's a
thing.
requisition.
That's what I want to know, right, we can wait for the second.
Same with the school district.
Yeah. So it will show on the.
You have a line on
tax,
your
yeah.
tax notice called
Oh,
Metro.
okay.
So we don't have a list of the expenditures for Bowen here. The expenditures are primarily related to the parks, the regional parks here. And I think the last time I saw a number associated with that, it was well in excess of $200,000. So our requisition, if you think in crude terms of offsetting what we get for what we pay, even in terms of the parks function, we're getting a lot from the region.
And the Davis Orchard this year.
Davis Orchard as well, yeah.
And the 911 telephone service.
Yeah,
Very
all those
direct.
things, and access to the expertise that they have, which is, you know, considerable. And then we met on Friday in that amazing snowstorm for 4 hours.
You got there.
Yeah, I got there by public transit and my snow boots. And it was an extremely interesting meeting. There were 10 delegations, which is unusual. We typically get 1 or 2. The delegations were all related to 2 major projects that were proposed to go forward to public hearing because both of the projects are at odds with the regional growth strategy, and they needed to be discussed thoroughly. They're called the Hazelmere Project and the Flavel Project. Hazelmere is in Surrey, Flavel is in Port Moody. And in both instances, Metro staff provided a report recommending that we vote against them. And in both instances, the board decided to take the proposals to public hearing. And it was, there's some news coverage of the Hazelmere project. All sorts of issues came up in terms of making decisions on really very significant development projects. Hazelmere is 60 acres in Surrey. Part of it's in the ALR, and it's what they called a non-contiguous expansion of the urban containment boundary. So what it means is the urban containment boundary is there, and then they're just pulling this in to the urban area. And staff characterized it as leapfrogging the urban containment boundary, and they were extremely concerned about the precedent that would set. It's 145 lots, all single family, quarter acre apiece. It requires the extension of the sewer past the edge of the urban containment boundary, which they're very, very leery of. There's been 3 years' work put into Hazelmere. The agrarian element of it, because there's housing, there's a golf course, there's a chunk of ALR, and then there's this 145 single-family homes, no multifamily residential. So it goes against so many parts of the of Metro 2040. And when it was being considered at the planning table in Metro, the planning committee, it was, people were just sort of bouncing between being 49% in favor, 51 against, and then back and forth. And the final vote was 6 to 7 against, at the planning table. There was a very impassioned speech from a fellow from, I think he was from Delta, about how you put in place something like the regional growth strategy, and then the people at the table actually have to have essentially the brains to think about individual situations and figure out how that actually applied, and to judge these projects coming forward on their own merit. And what ended up with Hazelmere is that it got the go-ahead to go to public hearing, but largely because the Metro directors wanted to hear from the public. They wanted to hear what all those folks in Surrey had to say about what was being proposed here, and with a lot of concerns. The chief of the Semiahmoo spoke for about 15 minutes about the importance of this project, because there's a lot of remediation involved to the Little Campbell River, and he saw it as having some important consequences for his community, because they've been under boiled water advisories, and he probably tipped the balance to moving it forward to public hearing. So what will end up happening if this goes through is there'll be over 40 acres that will be potentially farmed. There'll be a small chunk that will come into the ALR, and then there'll be 145 single-family homes, which will most likely be million-plus homes.
Oh, yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah. So there were concerns about the type of housing that was being built. The Flavel site is it was identified as what's called a special study area in the in Metro 2040, which means that the municipality has signaled to Metro that they're going to be doing something with that site, and they will be coming back. The upper lands on the North Shore, also a special study area. So the Flavel mill site is no longer particularly functional as a sawmill, and the mill is going to be moving anyway, and they want to turn it into an ocean, what they call the oceanfront district, and it's just over 30 acres. They're anticipating that by build out, if they build what they want to build, it's going to accommodate 7,000 new residents by 2040, which is half of their projected growth. So you can get a sense of how important Port Moody on the waterfront.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, old sawmill. It's zoned at the moment as industrial, and they want to move it to a mouthful, medium-high density mixed use neighborhood that's integrated with the waterfront. And there's a chunk of it that's industrial. So it is genuinely a mixed use site. And it's moving from being solely industrial at the moment to accommodating their residents. It's really worth taking a look. You can look at the material that's in the agenda for Friday, but to see how they've imagined this building out over the next 20-odd years is really quite fascinating. And there's more support, there's less controversy over this going forward, because the municipality had signaled that they had plans for it, and the municipality wasn't going to support the Metro 2040 document unless it was designated as being special study. So as an example of an area that's being used for both residential and industrial is a good example to look at. And the other example, this is coming from Metro, the other example where they're trying to do that mixed use that's worth looking at is the Maplewood project in North Vancouver. Really interesting meeting. Flavel. Yeah, Flavelle. And the Port Metro Vancouver got in there, and Mr. Sylvester was not too happy with the loss of industrial land, but the mayor of Port Moody got kind of apoplectic and said, we have tons of additional industrial land. 22% of the land base of Port Moody is zoned industrial. And Mike said to Robin Sylvester, I think is his name, if you want to come and talk to us about industrial, we've got plenty. Come talk. You don't need to have this particular site that's so important to us, and it's just down the road from their major transit hub. So really a good example of the kind of complete, compact communities that Metro keeps talking about. It's very interesting. And it kept snowing, and we sat there listening to all these presentations and controversy through the snowstorm, and by the time we left, the snow had stopped.
There you are. There's a message there, sir.
I know, just keep talking until you sort it out and the snow stops.
As long as you can get home.
Yeah.
Islands Trust.
Well, I asked Tyler to include this on-table item, which you've got in front of you here, 10.3A. And it's been an amazing month for Islands Trust advocacy. This is one of the things the Islands Trust does for Bowen, for the whole trust area. And this one has involved all these different things that you can see here, from conservation of coastal Douglas fir, forests, through ALR, Agricultural Land Reserve, through anchorage and shipping safety, and herring management, which relates to cetaceans, right? Especially killer whales and all the other whales that we're seeing in Howe Sound these days. The abandoned vessels has been a huge thing, and which you'll see there. And anyway, so I just wanted to put this out here. There will be discussion, I think, at the federal level today. I think it might come, or something. Anyway, very soon, about how to manage problem vessels, right? Bonnie's got the update.
Yeah. So there was a committee in Ottawa on February 12th, and I did do, as per
The standing committee on
Bill C-64. And I was asked to do some speaking notes for the chair, Peter Leckham. And I did do that. That was as per Claire Bratter's request.
Yeah.
So I didn't spend a lot of time, but just...
Yeah. No, and then
it was presented on February 12th.
Yeah. So this is one of the things I wanted to highlight, is Bowen Island municipalities working with the Islands Trust. And so Bonnie's notes were presented to Minister Mark Renaud. It's unusual that it's been about 15 years or something since the chair of the Islands Trust has had an audience with the federal minister, who just says, 15 minutes, what do you want to say to me? And so this has been a really lively year, and lots of good work that the Islands Trust is doing on behalf of and with Bowen Island Municipality. Thank you, Bonnie. So I just want to flag some of these things, and no doubt you heard more from Pam Goldsmith-Jones, but I'll just stop now, except to say Councillor Morris and I will be going to Trust Council in March on Salt Spring. Is our next meeting.
March the 13th, so we don't want to really leave meeting on the night of the 12th. We have to be up early the next morning. And the budget will be going forward, and that's the meeting where the budget is reviewed, and the draft budget that's going forward has a requisition to Bowen Island of $295,000.
$295,000.
And
Advocacy.
That's, yeah, and I think, Bonnie, did you give, Patty Heitzman from Squamish was also invited to speak to the committee in Ottawa, and I know she asked us for
I
input.
just contributed.
And you
as
contributed
Claire's
some top
request.
comments.
I
to her
forwarded
staff
Bonnie's
person.
comments to her.
Yeah, so did I, so, yeah. Okay, so let's move on to consent.
Okay.
Oh, you're
Next
10.4.
up is me. So our meeting with Pamela Goldsmith-Jones was largely to do with potential funding for a community center. And I think the upshot of that is that they want us to have our money in place before we go to them asking for a grant. Very important. They don't care where it comes from, they don't care who it is, they don't care if it's taxes or if it's donations or whatever, but we shouldn't walk in the door without it. And I mean, that was really the, and my apologies, I had some notes that I had taken on this and was trying to pull them up and I just can't find them right now. Others who were there, there's something else that
Well,
came
the
out of that
other
meeting that-
interesting thing was, we've been waiting with this new Build Canada funds, phase two, for the bilateral agreement between the province and the feds, and I had thought we were further behind than other provinces, but the indication we got from our MP was that we were sort of in the same, you know,
A little bit ahead, he said.
we were actually maybe even a little bit ahead. But I also got the feeling that the bilateral agreement had not been signed yet, because she, if it had been, I think she would have had it with her. And the federal budget is tomorrow. Is tomorrow the 28th? No, Wednesday. So whether there'll be any announcements of any funding processes or whatever in the federal budget, I didn't think that it was as far along as I had been hoping it might have been, because I had thought if the bilateral agreement had been signed, she would have had a copy of it.
Right.
And she might have been able to sort of give us a hint that, yeah, the details of grant applications will be coming shortly or something, which, you know, she can't release it before the minister does, but we didn't hear any of that, so I don't know where we're at, and we certainly didn't get anything in the provincial budget announcements, so.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
one thing she did say, she didn't think there would be intake dates. So
Be a
the
rolling-
idea that it would be
Yeah.
rolling funding.
Well, it's a
Annual
rolling
commitment.
intake, but
Timing-wise, it's
but
good.
I don't know how they can not say, okay, we'll take applications in, and then 6 months from now, we're gonna sit down, because you can't look at the first one and then say, oh, we'll give you the money, and then turn down the second one, and then you've got to.
You would
know.
think that, but
Yeah,
she
so-
didn't give that indication.
Well, no, it was no deadline for grant applications.
No.
It would be a rolling intake, but I think there probably would be set times where they look at them. And that's in some other grants, but yeah,
I would expect.
yeah, but
Yeah,
that was an odd.
but basically we don't know. Other than-
I mean, I have some of her exact words here when it comes to the community center and the grant funding. They need indication of community support prior to any grant funding. Don't care how this is done. Not unrealistic that they will pay 50 to 60%. 20 to 30% needs to come from the community. They use Lions Bay as an example. She used Lions Bay as an example. They went for the referendum first before doing any grant funding. And just she reiterated a number of times, get the MP's office input into the grant before we submit.
And the provincial guy said that too. They're happy to review and we're better to make sure they do.
So with Lions Bay, they did their their omnibus referendum. And did they also do local fundraising? Do you know?
I don't know.
They just did.
Their share of that.
They just said, as part of a by-election, the electorate was agreeing for them to borrow up to, I think it was $3 million for waterworks repairs or capital costs for waterworks. That was approved at referendum. Then they went out to the province and the federal government looking for their 2/3 to make it so they could make the thing happen.
So that has implications in terms of the sequencing of the work that the community center is doing. Right.
Yeah, you have to,
Yeah.
if you,
Which,
she didn't want to take a chance on announcing that they were funding a project only to have that project then fail at referendum in the community, and she's committed to federal funds and used up the part of her writing and all that sort of thing, only to have it fall apart. She was
So that's important to convey.
Yeah, we got a chicken and egg
community.
situation,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
The other thing I thought was interesting that she said it and also mentioned a couple times was for us to connect with the Sunshine Coast MLA, who's NDP.
Right.
And make sure to keep Nick Simons?
Nick Simons.
Nick, yeah, keep him in the loop. And
Why?
because he's part of the government.
Provincial government.
So it was interesting.
So-
She
I see what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah. You want somebody who's sitting at the table when they're discussing it.
yeah, so just for clarity, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to clarity. So in terms of the money that we need to have in hand before going, do we have to have the full project amount or just commitment to the third?
I got the impression it was commitment to the third.
Commitment to our
Okay,
share,
yes, that's
our
what-
share of the
Sharon
funding.
thought it was a bit different, I was surprised. So we
Yeah,
just
well,
need to show that we have a plan for the third and we have community support.
And it's whether.
Those are the two prerequisites,
Any money that wouldn't come from the feds and the province, we have to show that we've got it in hand.
which is, she indicated about a third or 30%.
Well, it's more than, there's also just other money, you know, we were running numbers the other day.
Yeah, that's what we don't know, we've always assumed in the past it was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
Well, that's the old
Now
program.
she's saying that the
40,
federal
40,
government
20.
will go more than that, they might go up 40%, so it's a matter of how much will the province go. And then with something like this, there may be some environmental, geothermal, LEED something
Yeah,
for
I know
public
that.
buildings, if there's any of those sorts of programs that pick up 20 grand here and there.
Okay, so it was a finance, do you believe, the finance
We had a meeting
committee?
the other day and we talked about it, so we've run some numbers and we sort of have a good feel, but I don't.
This was informative.
Well, the information from her was informative, yes, because we had to ask that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
She was very clear that 20 to 30% is needed from the community.
Well, that's, yeah, when you're talking about the grant, but then with the community center, there's other issues.
Okay.
Can that include, so that 20 or 30%, can that include, were you given the impression that could include grants from other sources?
Yes.
If they were in place?
It depends.
Like in the arts community, I'm saying,
I would assume so, I don't know.
Well, that's where you need the bilateral agreement and you need the application guide, because they don't consider the value of your land as part of the project, they never have. And sometimes they will, if you're getting other federal grants, they'll take those into consideration in the total, and other times they won't.
Right.
So it just sort of depends.
So we don't know yet.
Yeah, but they will ask what other sources of funding you've got, and if you've got other federal grant, yeah, so it's really, we're
We still
waiting.
need to come up with about 3 million on our own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that-
3 million's nice around it.
Well, and that's what, we don't really know whether the municipal hall portion, which was never included before, she acted as if, well, it's kind of a multi-purpose building, she chatted away as if it might all be eligible.
Well, she
But we
doesn't,
don't
but the
know.
province has said that they don't consider the municipal hall offices,
Right.
but there's all sorts of
Meeting
multi-purpose
rooms,
part,
multi-purpose
meeting
rooms,
rooms,
yeah.
this stuff that isn't.
Might boil down to a square footage discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but it may end up that you have to pull 2 million, 3 million out of the amount that
We
we're
run
applying for.
all those
and-
numbers the other day, and we're still talking of somewhere that we would have to come up with of the total package, in addition to what we've already got and can fund with a mortgage of somewhere between 2.5 and 3.
Um,
No sweat.
Yeah, over and
Michael's
above what we
writing a
can
check
fund
right
for
now.
mortgage.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like it's
Okay, so shall we go back to item 3.2, we'll go in order of where it falls on it.
Okay.
Committee of the whole minutes you didn't like?
I had a number of issues where part of the reason I didn't like them was the, gotta get back in my agenda notes here, I was busy looking at the Flavel, get in here, come here. the resolutions, 18, 37, 38, they're fine in the wording, but we don't know which area they're being applied to. So going back, there's 4 areas in lot 2, and we haven't said, we just said to, by removing detached dwelling as a permitted building. Well, is that an area 1, area 2, area 3, or 4? So I would suggest that we defer approval of these minutes
Yeah, sure.
to a future meeting. And I pulled 3.3 for 2 very simple little typos when I actually ended up looking at them, and I emailed those to Tyler, and Tyler tells me he's in agreement. One was that both Sue Ellen and I made a report on the to Gary Anderson's comments, and the other was just a little 2 that was missing in a resolution.
Okay, so,
So I'll move that the minutes be adopted as amended.
yeah, seconded, all in favor, pass unanimously, okay? And now we're up to 3.4.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is, I can see, 3.4 is the wildfire one. So maybe this is just a question for you, Kathy. I can see that she must have applied for this grant already, that she's asking us for permission to apply for, because the deadline has passed, and the date on the report that that she's included in here was for the previous meeting, February 13th. So here it is, and so I'm just wondering, if we just pass this here, are we providing support for the proposed activities as is required, or will she come back to us again for support for the proposed activities? So we don't know what the activities are except for the few lines in her report. For example, there's debris disposal, like a chipper and things, and I'm going, should we put a lot size limit on that, or is there,
I think she would probably be going back to EPEC.
Right.
Executive committee.
Yeah.
Emergency Program Executive
Thank you.
Committee?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so by passing 3.4 here, we're just supporting applying for the grant, not necessarily all the activities that might come out of it, because
No, I
some
think
of them are
that was
planning
the
activities, right?
intent, yeah.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
see if we get to 10 grand, then figure out what we're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, as long as it's understood that they're gonna come back, that's,
Yeah, that's.
yeah.
I'll clarify with her.
Okay, then I move the recommendation that's written there at 3.4.
Seconded, all in favor? Okay.
Thank you.
And
And then
then 3.5.
3.5, this just relates to Nick's presentation and public comments. And I think this is great, that the collaborative projects process seems to be working well, because now there's a proposal to add this shelter, and that's come through the same process, which is great. My only my question, I guess, there is, why is the shelter added? It's 16 feet by 22 feet, which is, pretty big space, and I'm going, is it part of a playground, or is it proposed as a picnic area, or what's going to be the furnishings in it? Because as somebody who has worked with many groups of children in concrete floored outdoor shelters, concrete floors are really hard, and they're really, for children, they're very uncomfortable to play on or to sit on, and to little children they smell. And I'm not sure they would be easier to clean than the kind of surfaces that you might use under a regular playground. My proposal would be to make it flexible by letting it also be a place where kids could play, or little kids could sit on the ground. So I'm just wondering if you could refer to the concrete part, and how is that cemented in?
My understanding is it is forms, it's a pad, a concrete pad. That's what was proposed by the proponent of the West Side Playscape Group. Just, hearing the discussion earlier, just a little bit after Nick presented, we do also have down at the Works Yard, and they're already purchased. They're leftovers. They're large sort of tiles. They're sort of kind of a ceramic type. Ceramic or concrete. I guess ceramic or concrete, but they're thinner, and they're these nice sort of pavers, I would call them. So we do have that option as opposed to concrete. That that is a potential option, that we already have those in supply for underneath the shelter. And back to your question, the intent was for it to be sort of have a picnic table under there so that parents could sort of put their gear underneath the shelter while the kids play, keep the equipment dry or their stuff dry, and have a place to eat under shelter, just to increase the usability of the playscape in our 10 months of rain.
Okay.
Right.
Because I like the idea of pavers. I really support the idea of keeping it flexible under the shelter, because so many times I have tried to have a circle of little kids with their backpacks and their lunches who want to sit on the ground. You can't get everybody at a picnic table, and it's actually more accessible for people of different ages and people with strollers and everything if you don't have your bolted down picnic table in the middle. And people can bring chairs or other sit-upons and things. So I would just support something that, and because this may be our first park shelter ever in a municipal park, I just want to keep, to lay the groundwork, to use another pun, to keep it as a flexible multi-use building, because it may be that there'll be other groups would want to use their space for different things we don't know exactly, or that use will change over time, or different furnishings will come. And so I just want to keep it flexible, but that would be my approach, and something that children can play on, not the concrete.
So you're suggesting it would be just a picnic, if there was to be a picnic table under there, that it would be movable?
Yeah, sometimes you want to move it out so that you can have a game, or that so that children can sit in a circle and eat their lunch, but not with the picnic table in the middle. We want everybody to be able to. So that would be my proposal.
Okay, Allison.
I guess just a couple of things. In thinking about the presentation from Vix, you don't want the concrete to be up above the level of the ground, so you could actually get a wheelchair or a stroller or something in there, so it's the same level. Thinking of you know, grandparents or even parents, and if the kids are all playing, having a picnic table there, because you don't haul along your portable chair along with the stroller and everything else, so that you can actually, the parents can sit around and have their coffee and chat and keep an eye on the kids. So there needs to be some, from my perspective, it would be really nice to have some sort of a seating on.
Yeah, I was thinking benches.
Structure.
A picnic table takes up a lot of space for a surface that you might not need. Benches that face the picnic area. Otherwise, everybody sits around the back of the benches to look at the action. So just some considerations. And otherwise, I will. I would move the recommendation on the condition that.
Flooring surface.
Yeah, the group, I guess what it is that that alternatives to a concrete floor surface be considered. Because I don't want to take all the.
You put rubber mats in there too, those little half-inch rubber mats.
I think it would be considered that that's a trick. Because you're going to talk to the stakeholders.
Yeah,
you're going to
exactly.
look at the concrete paper idea and see what the other input is from the other stakeholders.
And yeah,
consultation.
exactly. And the shop
Yeah.
teacher may have wanted to do this and be thinking about rubber mats on top. I'm not sure. So I don't want to take away all the decisions. I just want to say be considered.
Okay, I'll let Maureen speak to it, and then I'll ask Tyler to give us the wording.
I'm okay as long as it's be considered, but I don't want to put any impediment in the way of these folks moving forward with a project that they have really owned. And this is an additional thing that I imagine they've given a lot of thought to. I don't have a concern about a concrete pad. I see those in all sorts of parks, and they seem to be perfectly functional to me. So if the proponents of this project feel that they want to have a concrete pad and that will work best for that site and for to help them meet their obligations to maintain the playground, fine.
Yeah, I think.
That's why I moved that motion that
It's
way.
the consideration.
Well,
Yeah.
has somebody seconded that motion? Because I'm looking at the documents and I don't see anything that specifies a concrete
It is.
pad.
It's there.
I'm going to
In the
second it
document
because I
itself,
support
you
the
know.
word
Just read it.
consider.
Oh, I don't know if it's in the.
No, it's the agreement.
Schedule A.
Well, what
Just
we're
one
being
second.
asked to do is approve signing of the the mayor and CAO to sign the agreement, and I don't see any specifications as to what the flooring is going to be in this agreement. So,
I believe it's as per Schedule A.
I'm reading
And-
Schedule B and I'm reading Schedule A, and I can't find anything in there.
I'm just reading
It says pad footing.
the,
It's got Simpson footing connectors at post to footing,
yeah,
so.
I guess it's in their schedule where they say that they would be pouring the concrete pad in March or April.
That's in the report, that's not in
Okay.
that's not in the agreements.
I think that if we,
So I'm quite happy to pass the motion as it's written.
so we take
I
the
think
motion.
Melanie seconded my motion to add the words that alternatives to a concrete surface in the shelter be considered.
Okay, can I just speak
Yes.
to that? I'm happy with the word considered. Nick seemed open to that,
Oh, yeah.
and I think it just kind of opens up a different dialogue that they could have within their group. If they come back with
Say no.
concrete, that's then fine, but
Yeah, I don't,
I think there's merits to consider it, but agreed not to.
That's all I'm asking.
Okay. So we have the resolution on the table is the recommendation with the words added, we'll consider alternative things. So that is the motion. So Allison, are you?
Well, it does say consider, so that's.
Okay, so you're happy with that? Okay, and we've got it seconded, all in favor? Okay, so that's passed unanimously. Thank you. I do believe
Close.
that I can actually say we're adjourned.
We get a 5-minute stretch break.